Okay. So welcome everybody to this first spring, so to speak, or early year meeting of the Journal of Population Economics, where we present papers with authors. And Milena Nikolova is the chair of the first session today.
Yes, thank you very much, Klaus. So we have a fantastic and rather long lineup of papers. So just in terms of housekeeping, very briefly, each presenter has 10 minutes to present. They will see a clock that is ticking, and then we'll have 5 minutes for Q&A with the audience and changeover of slides to the next author. So just to preserve the quality of these presentations, I would like to kindly ask everybody who is not presenting to mute themselves. And when asking a question first, raise your hand. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our first speaker, who is Danny Blanchflower, who I think does not need further introduction than that. So Danny, please take it away.
Thank you. So I wrote a paper with Andrew Oswald, which is quite cited, about well-being over time between Britain and the United States, and it has something wrong in it, which is the opposite to what this paper says, and we'll talk about why. I thought I'd start you off with my fishing picture, because I've been very intrigued over time about the well-being of women, but the snook are pretty interesting. I thought I'd show you this. The snook, actually the snook, it's this giant fish that I fish for all the time. All snook are born male, and then they become female, and all the big fish are females, and to be big you have to be smart. So all the smart snook are female. I just thought I'd start you off with that. So this paper is actually about trying to understand the paradox, so-called, and it uses. So we've basically gone to every piece of data we can think of across every country we can think of. All kinds of cohort data and world poll data and European social survey data. And basically now we get essentially the same result. So the paradox, which actually in a sense I sort of set going in many ways by earlier papers, and I didn't really understand this. The paradox was that if you look at mental ill-being equations, anything you like, depression, anything like that, it was always true that women were more mentally, on those negative affect, women always came in positive. They were more likely to be depressed. But if you ran a happiness equations, women's sign was also positive, and that looked weird. So on the one hand, they said, you see that, women say on an unhappiness equation, they're more unhappy, but they're more happy. And that seems like a puzzle, which is where we've kind of gone to with this. I would certainly say over time, that puzzle's become less of a puzzle, and we'll talk about why. A lot of it has to do with the fact that economists have focused on variables like happiness, life satisfaction, and Cantrill's ladder. And by focusing on those, that's sort of generated more of a puzzle than probably it should. So what we do here is we think about every data set we can think of and every different measure of well-being that we can think of, and try and see if that makes any difference. So basically the bottom line here is, essentially for any variable that I can think of, that I think of as a well-being variable, other than life satisfaction and happiness, there ain't no paradox. In everything we see, in every negative affect variable, so a variable which is, as I say, like depression, in all of those equations across every country, everywhere you look, whether it be about anxiety, depression, sadness, loneliness, being tense, and many more, women always and everywhere have worse mental health. And in other work that I'm doing, and other people around the world are now doing, there's been a dramatic rise in the ill-being of the young, and especially amongst young women. But that's another literature, and I'm happy, and I'm writing endless things, and lots of other people are. But that result runs through strongly. Also turns out that in many other ways of measuring things, women's happiness is also much less than men. So if you ask simple questions, again, across it doesn't really matter where you do it, what data set you do it, you get the same thing. And so if you ask things like, how's democracy? What do you think about the economy? What do you think about the state of education and health service? And I've done a lot of work trying to predict recessions and trying to think about expectations and trying to think about men and women's views on the economy. And women turn out to be much less optimistic about any of these things than men are. And also, if you look at things at satisfaction in the moment in terms of peace and calm and cheerfulness and feeling active and vigorous and fresh and restive, those things turns out to be very consistent with each other. And in everything we ever look at on those variables, women are less happy than men. The problem, and we can talk at the end about why this might be, it obviously has something to do with language. So if you look at something like a simple thing in various of the papers we've looked at in the Gallup World Poll, there are questions which say things like, yesterday, did you feel enjoyment? Yesterday, did you feel happiness? And you get completely different gender signs in the variables, and we'll look at it in a second. And it's hard really to understand quite how this comes about. So I'll show you a few things. I'm halfway through, I'm doing well, I'm not in my clock. So let's just go with a few things that I sort of started out, the Wellbeing Over Time paper, and Stevenson and Wolfers and other people sort of focused on this variable, happiness, in the US General Social Survey. And what you see is it's sort of a function of when you look at it. And it turns out roughly across time when you run a thing, if you take the happiness data in the General Social Survey, the answer is there's no gender effect, because you can see they pretty much track each other. But actually, people sort of didn't spot. Let's go to the next one. Easterlin, in many of the early things that he worked on, he actually measured happiness, not by that happiness question, but by questions about financial satisfaction. How satisfied are you with your finances? And if you look at that, it's quite clear, basically, across this data file, when you run these equations, and they're in the paper, women are always, this is a male series, women are always less satisfied financially. And so they are in all kinds of other measures, every other measure you come to, except for that happiness measure. So let's just give you a little taste, and obviously there's lots of data in there and lots of questions, but here's a little taste, and I think it's quite illustrative of the difficulties that you have. So if you just ask a question, how happy are you? Then females turn out to be happier than men. Just ask a simple question. And it's the same people. Let's go ask the same people. What do you feel about your national government? What do you feel about how democracy works? What do you think the state of the economy and the state of education and the state of health services and how your life has turned out so far and your standard of living? And in every case, the sign is the opposite to the sign you observe when you ask this question about happiness. So obviously this is a problem. And then consistently, I see you show you the stuff at the bottom, consistently, when you ask, are you depressed? Are you anxious? Are you sad? Are you lonely? Did you have restless sleep? You get essentially the consistent result, no paradox. Males are happier on the top variables and they're less unhappy on the lower ones. This, I think, is pretty illustrative. And actually, this is on the Gallup World Poll. But if you take these same people, and you can do it in a number of ways, but if you simply, this is across 2 million people across 135 countries, you simply ask the question, did you experience the following feelings during a lot of yesterday? I see no reason why I shouldn't think that's a measure of happiness. I mean, just because the word happiness is it, we don't really care. I mean, essentially it's about well-being. And if you do this, you simply ask about enjoyment, then there's a positive male coefficient. But you ask this question that economists have used, particularly in the Gallup World, and I'm extremely negative on the Cantril question. I'm extremely negative about the Gallup World Poll data, as you see in a number of papers that I've written. I don't think it really is of actually much value of any kind, not least because the surveys are taken at different points during the year. But anyway, I'm pretty down on the Gallup World Poll, and if people are interested, they can write to me. But I have half a dozen papers now, and I've been advising the UN and others that it's not fit for purpose. But anyway, here's this contradiction, and I've got 2 minutes left, and I'm doing pretty well. But in some of the data files, and here's the contradiction, some data files you can actually get the exact opposite to what I had on happiness. So if you could recall a little bit ago, I showed you, let's just go back. I showed you here that in the European Social Survey, all these things are consistent. You just ask the question, how happy are you? And males have a negative sign. Well, if you go to the European Quality of Life Survey, pretty much same countries, pretty much the same question. There's this inconsistency. in the happiness data. 1 minute to go, and I'm doing pretty well. There's my fishing picture. I'm done with fishing. That's a big, smart female snook. The one thing I would say, and I haven't really had the time for it. It certainly does appear in the data that over time, this inconsistency, and we've been looking at the British data and others, it does look like this inconsistency in terms of the sign on the gender variable in happiness and life satisfaction, certainly in the UK, has sort of resolved itself. And actually, from the period since the pandemic, that inconsistency has really hit hard, perhaps not least because the pandemic, it appears to disproportionately, and perhaps the periods before it, has disproportionately hit the young and hit females. So I don't think there's an inconsistency here. I think the paradox is really in the data, not really there. It's in many senses driven by trying to use these life satisfaction data. And I got 20 seconds. And I would advocate that actually there's lots of different ways of measuring well-being. And that's probably the right way to go, because if you have a set of data and you take one variable and you get something, and then you just slightly rephrase it and you get something different. So I think the evidence is actually, there isn't a paradox. Women are less happy than men. 11 seconds, 10, 9, 8, done. How's that?
Well, that was impressive. That's for sure. Thank you very much, Danny, for this wonderful presentation. The paper is open access. People can download it and read it. Are there any questions from the audience? Comments, questions, suggestions?
I see Anthony, and I see Martin. Hi, Martin. Haven't seen you in a little while. Turn your cameras on so I can see you.
On my side, I was clapping. On my side, I was congratulating you. So I don't know if someone else has a question.
No, go.
Oh, okay. No, on my side, but I mean, you sort of responded to my question, because I was reading the last World Happiness Report, where they were showing that for some indicators, actually, like there is also the life cycle. They have a sort of life cycle approach. So here, I was just wondering whether in your paper also you incorporated the idea of age, maybe. That the paradox might appear in some ages and some.
Yeah. Well, we haven't done that, not least because I got deflected because of obviously this whole. So what we're observing, and it certainly does look like there's a gender effect here. So think of the U-shape in age that we've written about endlessly. It appears that the left-hand part of that has basically fallen. And it's done it by age, right? So we've seen a big decline in the well-being of the young, but disproportionately amongst young women, right? So that is true. In the data we have so far, we have data there's a paper for Australia. I have a new paper out with Jiyoon and Alex showing it for the United States and the UK. And we now have a new piece of paper, a new set of variables for Canada. So the answer is, you are quite right. It appears that this thing has moved well down, the well-being of the young has moved well downwards. And your paper is very relevant to this, because it looks like it started to move downwards from around 2011 and wasn't driven by COVID. COVID merely extended that trend. But you're going to talk. But I think people have to actually think about what's happened since 2011. That looks to me like the crucial point, because it wasn't COVID that did this. So you're right, this interaction between age and gender. But all the ongoing research now, I think, has to be about under 25s. But yeah, I agree with you. But I have papers on it. Happy to send it to you. This is the next set of Blanchflower and Bryson papers coming, and there's a couple out this week.
Great.
Martin had his hand up.
Oh, pardon. Any other questions, comments? Have you also tried to look at this within these panel data surveys? I'm just curious how it looks over there, like in the German socioeconomic.
Well, obviously people don't change their gender, so it's easy to fix the effects, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the answer in these the gender. So we actually do. So the last table is actually about. We've been trying to think. So the last table in the paper actually pulls together the various panels. I mean, we can do more of it. So if you look at the last, there are. I would go back. I mean, if you look in the slides and things, I actually talk about the fact that in the paper, we actually have we use 4 different cohorts. So we actually pool the cohorts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in Germany, there's the socioeconomic panel, and in the UK, there are 4 panels. And we took all 4 of the panels, and obviously we can do more, but actually pooling those, we get exactly the same. So we take the millennium cohort, which is people born in 2000. We take the next steps, which is people born in 1990. We take people born in 1970, and we take people born in 1958. And the answer is we get the same. Now, obviously, you could do it individually, but by pooling the cohorts, that's a pretty cool way of doing it. So yeah, the answer is that's what we did.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's, you know, obviously important stuff. I mean, I'm intrigued if people perhaps can think about why it might be that you say things like, yeah, I had lots of enjoyment yesterday, but I'm not happy. I mean, there's the contradiction. You know, in my department, I've got Claudia Olivetti, and who runs the bureau's gender, and they don't know the answer. Why would it be that women disproportionately say they have enjoyment, but they're not happy? This is something I don't understand. You could change the wording, and the answer's different. And I need some help with this. I mean, I don't think anyone disputes the fact, right? I've shown you the fact. Why this happens, I do not know. And as I say, the women's group at Bureau, you know, Marianne Bertrand and all these, they don't know either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's well, more work for you coming.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I like to ask Enghin to upload his slides, and we can take any final comments for your paper.
Thank you. I think we're good, right? I don't see any hands. Thank you. I've got to go. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot for presenting your work, and see you next time. So then we are right on time for the next presentation by Enghin Atalay, which is a 21st century of solitude, time alone and together in the United States. I have had the pleasure of being the editor of this paper, and I really look forward to your presentation. So please take it away.
Wonderful, thank you. So as you know, how and with whom we spend our times, it's a critical component of our well-being. So in this paper, I reassess trends in social isolation, both on average and as they vary with socioeconomic status. So I apply data from the American Time Use Survey to measure trends in time alone and with others. I assess which individuals had the greatest increase in alone time, what types of interactions became more or less prominent, and the implications of these trends for well-being and equality. So to give you some numbers, among the types of activities for which people are asked who they were with, at the beginning of the sample in 2003, individuals spent roughly 44% of their time alone. This increased by 5 percentage points over the next 2 decades. But this increase was also very unevenly distributed, with less educated, lower income individuals having a greater increase in time alone. For instance, while college graduates' alone time increased by 2 percentage points, that of those with high school education increased by 7 percentage points. And then in the final couple of minutes, I'll try to provide a rough magnitudes for this 5 percentage point increase in alone time inequality, arguing that it's roughly equivalent to a 10 to 20% increase in household income inequality. So here are the main points of the paper. Individuals have been spending more time alone, with higher educated, higher income, non-Hispanic whites having the smallest increases. I then try to benchmark the changes in alone time, trying to place the alone time increase in income equivalent terms. Okay, so I use the American Time Use Survey for this project. This data set asks survey respondents to reconstruct their previous day, describing what activities they did, where these activities were, and for a certain set of activities, who they were with. So for now, what I'll do is I'll relate the fraction of time that each individual who is surveyed in the ATUS spends alone. And what I'm interested is estimating these year fixed effects, these beta AT that describe the average amount of time that an individual spend alone if they were surveyed in year T. In addition, to try to account for the fact that the survey changes in demographic composition, or maybe even in the, I'll include these controls for the day of the week, the month of the year that the survey took place, as well as any controls for the sex, age, race, and ethnicity of the survey respondent. So this first slide, it provides these estimates of the beta IT with different sets of controls. So these coefficients depict the difference in the share of alone time relative to 2003. That's the omitted year from this survey. And the vertical lines give 95% confidence intervals for the for these year fixed effects. So at the beginning of the sample, individuals spent 43.5% of their time alone. By 2019, this increased by roughly 5 percentage points to 48.7%, then increased over the pandemic another percentage point. Most of the increases you can observe in alone time occurred in the second half of the sample, beginning around 2011 or 12. Now, as I mentioned, some of the increases could reflect compositional shifts within the sample period. For example, the sample is increasingly weighted towards older individuals, and older individuals tend to spend more of their time alone. So to assess whether our trends simply reflect these demographic shifts, I'll amend the regression to additionally include controls for sex, age groups, and race. These coefficient estimates that are depicted in orange describe the beta AT with these additional sets of controls. So we find that our estimates of the increase in alone time are modestly smaller so the increase to 2019 is 4 percentage points rather than 5. And we can continue to add controls for the metropolitan status, education, employment status, or her household size. These results are essentially unchanged. So the fact that we observe increasing share of time spent alone does not reflect, for example, a decrease in household sizes or changes in labor force participation. So far, we've documented that holding fixed demographic characteristics, alone time has increased by 5 percentage points over the last 2 decades. But which groups had the largest increases? So here we're going to consider 3 ways to cut our sample: by race and ethnicity, by household income, or by education. For each of these 3 categorizations, we'll apply the regression that I showed you on the previous slide. And so now we have 3 sets of coefficients. Here we're breaking things down by race and ethnicity, one which corresponds to each of these 3 sets of ethnic and racial groups. The orange plots, for example, describe the change in alone time for non-white individuals. And as you can see, between 2003 and the early 2020s, alone time increased more for non-white relative to white non-Hispanic individuals. And so the gap in alone time increased by roughly 4 to 5 percentage points over the sample period. We can perform a similar set of comparisons by household income status. So individuals in higher income households had the smallest increase in alone time, and similarly for across different education groups. So individuals with a college degree had the smallest increase in alone time, and those with just with a high school degree had the largest. Okay, so in the paper, but not in the presentation, I examined what types of interactions decreased over the sample period. I'll omit this part from the presentation for time's sake. Okay, so in the final part of the presentation, we're going to consider the implications of these trends for subjective well-being. And so we're going to do so using a well-being module in the 2012, 10, 12, and 13 American Time Use Survey. So in these years, individuals were asked 2 sets of questions. First, they were asked to evaluate their overall life evaluation. And then second, for 3 randomly chosen activities from their time diary, individuals were asked to assess different emotions, the extent to which they were happy, tired, stressed, etc. So for these questions, for each individual, I'll compute what's called a U index, the fraction of the individual's day in which they reported a higher score for one of these unpleasant emotions relative to the happiness question. And I'm going to use these data to try to benchmark the importance of these alone time trends that I showed you. Specifically, I'll compare the slope of the relationship between alone time and well-being measures to the slope of the relationship between household income and subjective well-being measures. And I'll explain how I do this over the next couple slides. So this figure compares subjective well-being and alone time. The green plots the relationship between life evaluation and the fraction of the individual's time that is spent alone. So taking the average slope from this green line, 5 percentage point movement in the share of time that is spent alone correspond in the horizontal direction corresponds to a 0.016 movement in the vertical direction. So greater time alone is associated with lower life evaluation, and this is the rough relationship. The second figure maybe is a little bit more familiar. It plots the relationship between household income and subjective well-being measures. The slope of the green line here is 0.16. So a 10 log point increase in household income corresponds roughly to a 0.016 standard deviation decrease in this Cantrell ladder score. So let me put the last two slides together. So we know from the previous slide that a 10 log point increase in household income corresponds to a 0.016 standard deviation increase in the life evaluation measure. Similarly, a 5 percentage point increase in alone time corresponds to a 0.016 standard deviation decrease in the Cantrell ladder score. So we can kind of put these two bullet points together to say that in terms of the relationship with the Cantrell ladder score, a 10 log point change in household income is roughly equivalent to a 5 point decrease in alone time. And so in this sense, a 10 log point, so a 10 log point increase in household income is the same association with life satisfaction as a 5 percentage point decrease in alone time. This 5%, that's roughly the increase in the overall averaged over the sample and the increase in inequality over the sample between high and low educated individuals or between white and non-white individuals. So that's kind of what I wanted to present. So time alone increased over the sample and faster for certain demographic groups, and the increase in inequality between these demographic groups is roughly a 10 to 20% deviation in household income. So sorry for going a little over, but thank you for your attention. Looking forward to your questions.
It was perfectly on time. Thank you very much, Enghin, for this nice presentation. Please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. Maybe I will ask you, since I know the paper a bit better maybe than someone in the audience, having read several versions of it, but there was, Andrew has a question. So let me just briefly talk to you about this online gaming, and because it was featured very prominently, and then Andrew, please ask your question.
Yes, I hope you can hear me. Sorry if I've missed this, but you're looking at data from 2003 to 2022 time use survey. Is your sort of understanding of this that this is revealing a long run trend, or this is something weird that happened during COVID that's going to reverse immediately afterwards? Thanks.
Great. So I can answer the questions maybe in reverse. So I looked briefly. So the reason I started in 2003 is that's the year in which the survey began. One can try to stitch together time use surveys from different time use surveys between 1965 and 2003. It's a little bit challenging to measure alone time and increases in alone time and increasing inequality in alone time. But given those kind of difficulties, it seems that alone time was increasing considerably kind of over the last 35 years of the 20th century, with no noticeable trends in the whether they were greater or smaller for individuals with more or less education, or different racial or ethnic groups. And it does seem that there's something kind of an acceleration in alone time, if we're just talking about the last 20 years, beginning in 2011, 12, 13, that part of it can be tied to like a replacement of in-person to digital social interaction, but that, I think part of it is also kind of unexplained. And Milena, so you brought up online gaming. That really does seem to have picked up considerably in the late 2010s, and then especially during the first year of the pandemic, and especially so for younger, maybe not surprisingly, younger individuals, and for males who are kind of 30 and below. And then it's kind of an open question of, do you view these digital social interactions as kind of a good substitute for in-person interactions? I think people can reasonably have different points of view on that. The one piece of evidence from the American Time Use surveys, you can use these life evaluation and emotional well-being measures for people who have a lot of digital social interaction, so using social media or online gaming, and those measures seem to suggest that the interacting with someone online is not the same as interacting with them in person. So you have lower, you evaluate kind of online gaming if you're not in the physical presence of someone relatively low.
Yes, thanks a lot, Simone. And then in the meantime, if I may ask Anthony to upload his slides. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I find this gaming aspect particularly interesting. I just wanted to know whether you count online gaming, which is gaming with other people, as alone time, or do you notice in the data whether they play alone or with other online participants?
I should have been clear. So the American Time Use survey, their definition of who you're with is who is in your physical presence. So if you're texting a friend, but if you're alone, or if you're kind of chatting with a friend online, but you're the only person in the room, that for the purposes of the American Time Use survey, or in this paper, you're counted as alone. And so yeah, that's why it's a little bit murky whether kind of this definition of whether you're alone or not, it makes things a little bit ambiguous. I think, well, the last thing I'll say is, even if you think of this as interacting with others, even if you include that as you're not alone, alone time still has increased in the same way that I showed you, but just maybe the magnitudes are a little smaller.
Thank you very much. And it's a very rich paper. I highly recommend to everyone to read it in further detail. We have to move on to the next presenter, who is Anthony Lepinteur. Apologies for mispronouncing your last name, Anthony. So he's presenting joint work, and I see that most of your co-authors, if not all, are in the audience. So please take it away.
Thank you, Milena. Yes, indeed. Like, I think you have at least 3 out of 5 of the co-authors in the call. So which means that if you have questions, please go on the chat and Andrew and Conchita will address some of the questions. Okay, so that being said, we have 10 minutes and I obviously did not prepare for 10 minutes, so I apologize in advance, Milena, but I will go fast through some of the bits of this paper. First thing, I think the title is quite self-explanatory. We are interested in looking at the effect of teleworking on life satisfaction during the pandemic. And basically our angle is to try to investigate whether there is a sort of moderating role for family. And so let me first start by saying that this paper actually is part of a bigger project, which is a pandemic project, which we have been conducting at the University of Luxembourg. Very quickly, our objective was to look at different aspects of the impact of the pandemic. Here you have a non-exhaustive list of the papers we have produced so far. And if respect to some aspect of our life, COVID-19 changed a lot of things and we are now going back to normality, it seems that teleworking might be one of the long lasting consequences. Here you have a graph where you can see the share, the share of workers in a survey that we collected at the university, the share of workers saying that they work mostly from home. And you can see since April 2020 up to June 2023, that we have about 25 to 45% of our German workers in our survey that are working mostly from home. And if you ask them, do you work at least once per month from home? In June 2023, we still had half of the population, of the working population, working from home. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the pandemic created teleworking, but it definitely increased its prevalence and it might stick. So if it does, we need to understand what are the effects of teleworking on well-being. And from a theoretical perspective, this is quite ambiguous. You could say that there are positive effects, such as you're no longer commuting, you might have more autonomy, but there are also negative aspects of working from home because you may be less likely to interact with your colleagues. You might be more concerned about your career prospects because you talk less with your manager, for instance. Some people would also argue that work-life balance plays a role, but it's sort of ambiguous because, again, you could say teleworking may empower workers in reaching better work-life balance, but at the same time, teleworking might blur the boundaries between home and the workplace. So all of this to say that from a theoretical perspective, this is quite ambiguous and we need some empirical work. So I'm going to skip the literature and go directly to our paper. As I was saying, we are looking at teleworking and individual well-being, and we are going to try to put in the picture the family structure and try to uncover some moderating role. And so what do we do in the paper? We use panel data to observe the same individuals before and after the pandemic. We adopt a sample selection to attenuate the issue of self-selection, and then we estimate a diff-in-diff regression to estimate the causal impact of teleworking during the pandemic. And these are our conclusions, really in a nutshell. Teleworking, on average, reduces life satisfaction, but the family structure and gender, they do moderate this average effect. And more specifically for men, we find, for instance, that those who are married, they suffer less than those who are not married at telework. Among women, we also find that those with school-age children suffered the most. So it seems that indeed the family structure and gender do play a role. They shape the effect of teleworking. So when it comes to the data, so we are using the SOAP data. I don't think I have to describe it to you. You probably know very well these data sets. But I just want to take a couple of seconds just to mention the SOAP COVID-19 survey. So when we started the project, we had an early access to this special module of SOAP. And we used the 2020 and 2021 modules. And more specifically, I wanted to talk about the moment when the surveys were on the field. They were on the field between March and July 2020 and January and February 2021. So here in this paper, when we're talking about teleworking during the pandemic, this is the period we are referring to. Then when it comes to well-being, we are using life satisfaction, classic scale from 0 to 10. About the validity of the scale, I could talk about this for hours. Definitely not the place to do it today, but feel free to reach out if you want to know more. And when it comes to teleworking, well, in the first SOAP COVID 2020, there was this question in the course of the corona crisis: have there been the following short-term changes in your work situation? And so as you can imagine, a list of items, including started working from home full-time or started working from home part-time. In 2021, the question changed a little, because which of the following work situation currently apply to you. And then the same list, work from home, full-time or part-time. So we're going to put all this information together and estimate a definitive regression. So here, the dependent variable is going to be life satisfaction of worker I at time t. We are going to interact treat with post. So treat is the treatment dummy for those who started teleworking, during the pandemic. And post is the dummy for observations in 2020 and 2021. And what we are interested in, as with any difference in difference, it's gamma, the coefficient that is associated with the interaction treat time post. We have XIT, which is a vector of controls, and we also have individual and wave fixed effects. So this is why also you don't see treat and post independently, by the way, in the regression. It's because they are multicollinear with the fixed effects. So as I was saying, gamma is our coefficients of interest. It can be positive, it can be negative. That's what I was mentioning earlier. We don't know ex ante, so we need to estimate this regression to understand which are the forces that eventually are the strongest. Can we say that the effect of teleworking is positive or negative? Let's see what this regression and this data what do they have to say. And here, an important assumption when it comes to the identification is that gamma is causal under the assumption that teleworking is not chosen by worker, so that there is no self-selection into teleworking. So this is why we opted for a specific control group and a specific treatment group. So our treatment group is made of people who started teleworking in 2020 and kept doing so in 2021. And the control group is going to be made of workers who never teleworked. So here, the implicit assumption we are making is that the COVID-19 emergency forced some workers to telework, which is very likely in the early 2020, maybe less in 2021, but we can discuss it during the Q&A if you want. So let's assume that some workers were forced to telework, which is very likely. We still cannot argue that the probability to telework is random. Not everybody can actually telework. We don't have all occupations, we don't have all jobs that allow us to telework. So the assignment to the treatment may not be random. And this is actually what we document in the paper. It is not random. We know that the probability to telework is higher for men. It's also increased with education, with income. It's higher for those with white-collar jobs. So it's not random. So what do we need in our regression? Well, we need to upgrade our regression, our classic diff in diff. We also need to not only put the vector XIT, the classic way of controlling for standard social demographics. We also need to interact these social demographics with a post dummy to capture any potential confounding effect that the pandemic might have had through non-random selection. So this, I just said it. Something you might have realized at this stage is that if we are looking at people who started teleworking versus those who never teleworked, it means that we exclude status switcher, someone that might have started teleworking in 2021 or someone who was teleworking in 2020 and then stopped in 2021. For the moment, we exclude them just to be conservative and to know what we're estimating precisely with our diff in diff, but including the status switchers doesn't change anything. So, and now it's time to go to the results. So let me go directly here. Here you have the effect of working from home. This is the treat time post. And the first column, you have a sort of naive regression where we don't control for anything. And then column 4, the full model. So you can see that it's always negative. The effect is always negative. It's always significant, at least at the 5% level. And if we look at the column 4, which is our preferred specification, teleworking basically translated into a reduction of 8.7% of a standard deviation in life satisfaction. So not only it's statistically significant, it's also economically significant because this is roughly equivalent to a loss of income of 45%. Of course, it's a diff in diff, so we do all the parallel trend assumption checks, just showing you them very quickly. The paper also includes a battery of robustness checks. We also bring some ideas about the channels, maybe something we can talk in the Q&A. And now what I would like to show you is basically the gender effects on the first slide. So here you can see on the first half of the table, the effects for men, the second half for women, and you can see in column 4 and 8, which again are our preferred specification, that we have a negative impact for men and we have a 0 effect for women. And then we went one step further, and here I'm not going to describe the whole table because it's really big and ugly, but I'm going to focus on the right side of the slide. you can see that for men, being married actually does attenuate the negative effect of teleworking. And this has something to do with traditional gender roles. It's the idea that actually their wife are carrying, the lion's share of the household chores, and so they can still keep, focusing on working as if they were at their workplace. And for women, and I'm going to conclude on this, Milena, I showed you before a zero effect on average, but it actually confounds a variety of situations. Women with kids below school age, so women with babies, basically, they're actually happier when they telework. While on the other side, women with kids that are supposed to go to school, but don't go to school because of lockdowns, these are women that are actually significantly less happy. And in the middle, we have women that are somehow indifferent, those without kids. So at the end of the day, what we have, the zero effects, is just the sum of all these different situations. And I think I'm going to stop here because I already took one more minute. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for this interesting paper and presentation. If you'd like to ask a question in the audience, please raise your hand. Well, maybe I'll start and we can have more questions later. So I want to ask you a question actually that a colleague of well, our now joint co-author asked you when you presented this maybe a few years ago. But I'm just curious whether you have done something on it, which is whether you have taken into account the self-selection into answering the survey questionnaire based on teleworking status.
Yeah, well, actually, that's part of the things we have been doing. Like, we basically try to identify who are the people, who were more likely to contribute, to participate to the survey. And one of the things that is striking is that there is a huge selection on gender. So, for instance, we have more women who took the survey. So this, when it comes to why in particular women were more likely to take the survey, I think Carsten Schröder, one of our co-authors, the one who is in charge of, SOAP, would be more, I think he would be better at responding to this question. But we did document indeed this selection. And so what we have been doing, one of the things we have been doing is that we upgraded the paper with a set of robustness checks and more specifically propensity score matching, trying to get rid as much as possible as any sort, of selection into responding to the survey, selection into being part of all the sample, still having a job during the pandemic. There are so many levels of selection that I think we have like 4 or 5 different, columns of different propensity score matching on the basis of the selection that you can think about. So that's something that we took into account, yes. And obviously when we do it, our results, remain.
Yes, thank you very much. Further comments, questions for Anthony?
Well, then, in this case, if there are no more questions, maybe it's something I can mention that I didn't take the time to do to mention earlier, is that, so in the paper, we also look at the channels. And we have like this sort of 3 families of channels. We thought about changing the work environment, something changed. I don't know about your job characteristics, might be about your work-life balance, or it might be about loneliness. And when it comes to loneliness, we haven't found strong effects. It doesn't seem like it's the main driver of the negative effect of teleworking. For the work environment, unfortunately, the data set did not allow us to explore, in greater depth this aspect. But what we have found, though, is that there were some changes with respect to the work-life balance. So we saw that indeed, like these families who were teleworking, they were also more likely to spend time with their kids, but and also taking care of their kids in the sense that spending time with them, or also doing household chores. So there has been a change in the work-life balance. And also if you look at satisfaction with respect to the family life, there was also a reduction with the satisfaction with the family life. So it seems that was one of the channels, definitely the work-life balance. Some people were saying it could be positive, it could be negative. It seems that the net effect ends up being negative, according to our strategy at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. If I may ask the following presenter to already upload their slides, and there is a question in the chat, which I'll to you, Anthony, which is about the data. maybe you can respond specifically in the chat, and everybody
exactly, so that we don't take the time. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. And then let's move on to our next presenter. And I apologize if I mispronounce your name. I hope I'm right. It's Jiyoon Han, together with
Very good, yes, correct.
Thank you. So please take it away. I will start the new timer and you can start presenting.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to present my work with Caspar Kaiser at Warwick Business School, where in this paper we studied the time, use, and happiness across the 3 decades in the US. So there has been a growing interest in developing this comprehensive measure of well-being that can go beyond economic resources. And one popular way to measure, say, subjective well-being is to ask people to globally evaluate their life in response to a single question. So one example is life satisfaction, and the other can be the overall happiness. So, however, this type of questions is likely to capture these evaluative aspects of well-being instead of the experienced well-being. So, although there has been a lot of papers on measuring, capturing the evaluative part of well-being, relatively there has been less studies on measuring the experienced well-being. So in this paper, we attempt to, examine whether there is any difference between experienced well-being and evaluated well-being in terms of their determinants, their predictive power, and historical trends. So to answer that question, we measure the experienced well-being using the US time use studies, where the studies also collect the respondents' information about how they feel across a given day for given activities. So using this information, we calculated and constructed a time-weighted happiness, which is essentially calculated as self-reported happiness at the activity level, and then weighted by the amount of time spent on each activity. Okay. And using this measure, we assessed the distinctiveness of time-weighted happiness compared to, say, more popular or standard evaluative measures of well-being. So in particular, we look at the determinants of and predictive capacity of time-weighted happiness, and we also studied the long-term trends in the gender gap using this time-weighted happiness. So to summarize our findings, we find that there's an intriguing association between time-weighted happiness and other well-being measures. So in particular, there is a strong positive association between time-weighted happiness and health outcomes, especially the subjective health outcomes. But we find no association between time-weighted happiness and income or employment. And as the previous presenter showed, we also find that there's a negative association between time-weighted happiness and the share people spend alone. Okay. Regarding the historical trends in time-weighted happiness by gender, we find that initially between 1985 and 2013, women actually gained in time-weighted happiness relative to men. But after that, between 2013 and 2021, women's time-weighted happiness declined relative to men's. And we find that the initial increase in happiness is largely due to women allocating more time towards enjoyable activities, whereas the later decline in happiness is largely due to a decline in enjoyability of activities for women relative to men. Okay, so going into the detail, we use these US time use surveys where people also report the enjoyability or happiness level of time spent in different activities. So there's some difference between these two surveys between 1985 versus the more recent surveys in terms of this research method, I mean, the survey method, and in terms of the scale. Okay. So to harmonize these happiness scales over time, we converted the original scales into a common 4-point scale, such that the distribution of the rescaled happiness is stable over time. Okay. For instance, we convert the scores of 0 through 1 in 1985 to 0, and we convert 0 score recent surveys into 0. Okay. So the key assumption here is that each of these collapsed categories corresponds to a similar quality of affective experience across the surveys, although they're different in their survey method. Okay. But we find that if you use different, say, common point, say 3-point scale, 5-point scale, it doesn't really affect our results. Okay, then using this harmonized happiness scale, we construct this time-weighted happiness, and we constructed individual level time-weighted happiness, as well as and then group level time-weighted happiness by gender. So this H refers to the reported happiness of individual I for activity J in year T. And the remaining part represents the share spent on activity J in year T. Okay. And to construct this the group level time-weighted happiness, we essentially calculate the average happiness and average time use on activity J in year T for gender G. Okay, so this is the results where we study the relationship between time-weighted happiness and health outcomes. So I only show the panel B where I included time-weighted happiness as well as the life satisfaction as independent variables. We see that time-weighted happiness is predictive of various health outcomes, especially, say, subjective ones, such as feeling better yesterday and took pain medication yesterday, or general health is excellent. And we find that this is still, statistically significant even after we control for life satisfaction, as you see here. And then we turn to the historical trends in gender-gated happiness. We find that there was a decline in women's time-weighted happiness relative to men between 1985 through 2013. And then the gap shrank between 2013 and 2021. Okay. So natural question is, what are the really mechanisms through which there has been differential trends in time-weighted happiness between men and women? And so we try to decompose these trends into two components. So one is the change in the allocation of time, and the other one is enjoyability of individual activities. So to do that, we impose the common activity level happiness, meaning that both men and women have always had the same level of happiness, derived happiness from the same activities, and this will capture the role of the change in the allocation of time. And by imposing this common time use, we can study the role of the differential trends in the enjoyability of individual activities. And so we find that women allocate more time towards enjoyable activities between 1985 and 2013, which explains why the woman's time-weighted happiness increased relative to men. But then for the recent decline in time-weighted happiness, we find that this is due to the fact that the individual activities that women engage in become less enjoyable relative to men's. Okay, so to conclude, we find that there is an important and distinctive feature of time-weighted happiness compared to more standard well-being measures. But before we talk about broad, say, usefulness or practical usefulness of this measure, we need to resolve some limitations of time-weighted happiness. That includes, first, it imposes a strong assumption that time periods are equally weighted. So there could be other, although we think this is a good benchmark, but I think there could be other ways to use different rating schemes. And we also find that there's no strong association between time-weighted happiness and major decisions in life, say income or employment. Okay. And also, there's to collect this data, it involves a significant time and cost. So although there has been the technological advancement, which allow people to collect this data easily, still, I think this kind of data collection process is demanding and challenging. Okay. So I will stop here, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Perfectly on time. So we have some time for questions. Who would like to start? Well, maybe if you allow me to start, and then others will join the discussion. I'm wondering about essentially what you have done to cross-validate your measure with other measures, and of course for that I understand that you need data that is collected both in time use surveys and data more generally. But I'm just wondering about this association with income that you described. And is it somehow a feature of your measure that it is not associated with income? And you didn't show this now, but you also write in your slide major life decisions. So I'm wondering what aspect of well-being your measure actually captures.
So it's more related to, seems like the emotional, say, status and short-term decisions, rather than some long-term decisions. Yeah. So, yeah, that's, if you look at this table, and for instance, first one, the feeling better yesterday than on a typical day, apparently the time with happiness can predict of that, whereas the life satisfaction has no association with that. Yeah. But if you think about, say, more like objective well-being measures or more long-term decision-making, then we find that the time-weighted happiness is not strongly associated with those outcomes. Whereas life satisfaction tends to be strongly associated with those outcomes.
Yeah, maybe the reason why I'm puzzled is because generally more affect-based measures are also positively correlated with income, but maybe that's a discussion for another time. I see that Andrew Clark has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Oops, let's get the microphone on. So what you're finding is that women are switching to uses of their time that are relatively more pleasurable than the activities that men are switching to. And one of the big secular changes over the past 40 years has been the decline in the number of children. So is this driven by less female child care, or of course there's less female childcare, but there's also greater labour supply, and everyone hates working as well. So what are the actual secular changes in time use that are behind this?
I think you are right that, so as I show in this slide, at least the change in the time with happiness between 1985 and 2013 is largely driven by women allocating more time towards enjoyable activities. So they changed their time allocation, essentially. That drives these results. And this increase in work time is large part of this time allocation change. So, which is also, I suppose, associated with their, say, their childcare part as well.
But you know that. You know what these activities are, don't you?
Yes, we have a separate figure where I show how each activity's time spent on each activity changed. And unfortunately, I didn't include that in this slide.
No, that's okay. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. If it is possible for the next presenter, Philippe Sterkens, to already start switching his slides. And if there are any final comments, thoughts for the previous presentation, please write them down in the chat, maybe. And thank you very much to Jeehoon for the presentation, and thank you, Philippe, for yours. So I will start the timer, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Milena. Hi, everyone. My name is Philippe Sterkens. I am from Ghent University in Belgium, and today I will present my paper, I Won't Make the Same Mistake Again, Burnout History and Job Preferences, today's topic. First, some additional background. Why is burnout relevant for economists? There's a huge annual cost of burnout and stress-related mental health problems. For instance, in 2019, calculations from the Netherlands revealed a cost of about 2.8 billion euros. And while there has been a lot of research on the topic of job burnout, especially in psychology, there's a huge gap in the literature with regard to the labor market outcomes of individuals who suffer from job burnouts. Specifically, our paper will target the topic of job burnout and job preferences. And in the literature, there's only, to the best of our knowledge, one specific empirical study among medical doctors. And it states that doctors who suffer from burnout symptoms, they attach a higher value to salaries and being able to work among exemplary colleagues. The current study offers certain contributions to the literature. First, our study focuses on workers post-burnout, so after a clinical sick leave. Then, instead of focusing on medical doctors, we have studied a sample of the general working populations. And instead of focusing only on the salary and the ability to work with certain colleagues or not, we focus on a broader range of job characteristics based on the psychological framework of the job demands resources. Then our first research question was, do workers' job preferences for certain job characteristics vary by burnout history? Second, we explored two potential explanations. The first explanation could be that individuals with a recent history of clinical burnout have different perceptions on job characteristics. For instance, they could perceive collaborations with colleagues either as a more demand, as something costing energy, or as alternatively as more of a job resource, which provides them with energy and motivation. There's a second research question. The third research question explores an additional explanation, and that could be that there's not a difference in the perception of characteristics, but rather in the weighting of characteristics in their decisions whether they would apply to a job or not. Then our research method was a factorial survey experiment in which individuals with and without a history of clinical burnout rate 5 fictitious vacancies, or so-called vignettes. This is a small tabular overview of the different dimensions manipulated. For instance, a vignette would provide a description on the wage provided by a job offer, the contract type, the duration of the commuting time, the opportunity to work remotely or not, and so on. This would be a concrete example of the characteristics listed from a job vignette presented to the candidates, to the participants, and then each participant would rate the job offer in their likeliness that they would apply for the job, and they would share some additional perceptions. For instance, for this specific job offer, I expect that it comes with a high workload. Each of these perception and attitude scales were rated on a scale from 0 to 10. Then, to analyze our research question, we conducted OLS regressions wherein the standard errors were corrected for clustering of the data at the participant level. Indeed, each of the different participants rated 5 different job offers. Then going forward toward the results of our questions, we find indeed that there are differences in the job preferences of workers with a recent history of clinical burnout and those workers, those healthy workers, let's say, who never indicated suffering from burnout. First, we find that workers with a recent history of burnout, they are more attracted to jobs that offer the opportunities to work remotely. This is on the first research question, the bottom arrow. Then they are also more attracted to those jobs that provide them with opportunities to collect feedback from their supervisors on, for instance, their work performance. And interestingly, they indicate being relatively less attracted to jobs that offer educational opportunities. Then we're going to, after identifying certain associations in preferences, our second and third research question, as I'm repeating myself, will discuss potential explanations. There are no, we find no evidence for differences in demand perception. So it's not the case that workers with a history of burnout perceive, for instance, educational opportunities as more demanding for them. But however, we do find that they perceive feedback as more of a job resource. In other words, they find it as a more motivating element of jobs. So that could be part of the explanation. Then the third research question deals with an alternative explanation, the weighting of the demands and resources perception. And there we find no evidence for nor for demand perceptions, nor for the resources perceptions. In conclusion, we find that an association between a history of job burnout and job preferences. And one potential explanation, at least for the feedback, the attraction towards jobs offering feedback, is that they are attracted to those job resources that could foster their mental and professional health. This knowledge is particularly important for the reintegration of workers with a history of burnout, to stimulate their job search and also consider redesigning jobs upon their labor market re-entry. Future research could invest in longitudinal data, because this is valuable in searching for causal relationships. Our design is limited to associations. And interestingly, while our sample consisted of workers who successfully reintegrated following a burnout, it would be particularly relevant to study those who are unemployed or became long-term inactive due to a history of burnout. And thank you for your attention, and any questions are welcome.
Thank you very much for this short and efficient, informative presentation. So please, whoever would like to ask a question can start by doing that. Maybe I will start. So just one question on the design of this. Well, two questions. So did you run this as part of an existing survey, or how did you construct your universe of potential respondents? Is one, and then did you randomize the vignettes that they looked, or no?
Could you repeat the second question, please?
Yeah, I was wondering whether you randomized which respondents saw which vignette, or did everybody read everything?
Okay, thank you. The second question is the easiest. Yes, indeed, we constructed a D-efficient design is in our methodological literature, which states that we build sets of job offers that are randomized. In the sense that they provide a level balance across the different combinations of sets, but there is indeed some sort of randomization in the job offers. Then the first question, contrary to my prior colleagues, we could not rely on prior panel data that was accessible, so we had to collect our own data. In the case of job burnout, this is particularly challenging in the sense that this is a formally clinical population, And GDPR strongly limits our ability to, for instance, access registers on a national level. So we worked with a research agency that held a representative sample of Belgian citizens. And then using their pre-screening methods, we identified workers with and without a history of clinical burnout based on self-report and some additional checks, as in did a medical doctor give you the diagnosis or and so on, to guard the data quality.
Yes, thank you very much. Other questions, comments, suggestions? I don't see your hand up, or...
I had a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Kind of when was the data collected? You mentioned kind of teleworking is one of the most important things, and I guess kind of people's perceptions of that changed a lot over the last few years.
It was collected, I believe, a bit before the COVID pandemic. It was prior to the pandemic.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Do you have a chance to or do you think that might look a little different now, or any insight into that?
I think I'm not an expert on the topic of remote working, so it's always dangerous to make certain claims. But in the case of burnout specifically, talking about those individuals, I don't suspect any big differences. I believe throughout the pandemic we are all on the learning curve of remote working, and so perhaps it only facilitates it even more, and it's a good thing for people. Perhaps it's a good thing for people trying to reintegrate in the labor markets. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot for the question and answer. Any other questions or comments? Well, the paper is available for everyone to access and to read if you'd like to do that. So this concludes the first sub part of our JOPE GLO online workshop, which was on the topic of happiness and well-being. And we transition immediately to the next part, which is labor and family. And I see already that the next presenter diligently has uploaded the presentation. So I would like to first thank all of the presenters in the happiness and well-being session. And now we turn over to labor and family. So we have 3 papers there. So without further ado, Jiyoon Kim, please take it away.
Right. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be published at the Journal of Population Econ, and this opportunity to present my work here. So my paper is about the paid family leave and its impact on father's health. My name is Jiyoon Kim. I'm an economics professor at Bryn Mawr College, which is in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, in US. So the motivation is that some of you may have known that the US is the only country that does not have any mandated paid maternity leave. So the only mandate is the Family and Medical Leave Act, which went into effect in almost 30 years ago. But that FMLA is actually unpaid job protected leave for up to 12 weeks after birth. And a lot of papers have documented that only about a little more than a half of the women are eligible for this leave. So in response to this limitation, California has introduced the very first state-level paid family leave 20 years ago in 2004. So that paid leave is it's not that long. It's only about for 6 weeks. And although it says paid family leave, actually it's partially paid. So you get about 55% of your regular wage during this leave. And then this was the very first paid leave that was available for fathers in the US. So my research question and the goal is that I'd like to examine the effects of this California's paid family leave on both mothers and fathers' health around childbirth. So first question is, I am breaking down into two different time periods. I'd like to look at the impact on parental health and healthcare utilization right around childbirth, including the pregnancy period and right after the child is born, separately from the same outcome that are measured far away from childbirth, from 5 to 20 months after the childbirth. And then the second contribution of this paper is that there are only 3 papers that is looking at the father's health, and they're only looking at the father's mental health. So this is the first paper that looks at the both mother's and father's health, not only in mental aspect, but also physical and also healthcare utilization aspect. So I'm using the SIP data, the Survey of Income and Program Participation data, and then there is a topical module specifically about the healthcare questions. So I merged the core survey from these 4 different panels that includes the child's exact birth month and year, as well as the state when each individual was born, and then the parents' employment around birth. And then I merged these core survey with the topical module that was only selected in a certain waves. And then in this topical module, I collect the main outcomes that I use in my paper, including the report of current health status, the number of days sick, the number of nights that they spent in hospital, and daily prescription medication status. And then I actually used a random timing of the SIP topical modules relative to childbirth to look at the impacts just around childbirth and also time period after the childbirth. So basically, I'm using the different diff methodology with all these equations. So my main interests, coefficient of interest is beta 1. But I also include the birth date and birth year fixed effects, as well as a bunch of demographic characteristics and state year level characteristics to look at how the women who were exposed to these paid family leave, their health outcomes are different from women who are not exposed. And in addition to that, I add the parents with older children to structure the triple difference methodology. So here, in addition to families who have infants in their family, I also include families who have children older than 1, all the way up to 17 years old, to expand the sample. So my tables are quite huge, so I was not able to show everything on this slide, but I just want to summarize what I found. So actually, I have 2 different time periods, as I mentioned. The first one is during pregnancy up to 5 months after the birth. The reason why I'm looking at this period particularly is because this is the period when both mothers and fathers are able to take up the leave. So during this take-up period, mothers report positive outcomes for all of the measures that I use, including they report more likely to be excellent health and fewer days of sick, fewer nights spent during hospitalization. So although most women are hospitalized due to the childbirth, I find that people who are exposed to paid family leave actually spend fewer nights at hospital. And then also lower likelihood of daily prescription medication, given that taking medicine during pregnancy and then right after the childbirth is considered to be risky and then can result in premature birth or complicated pregnancy. This is a positive finding for these particular group. Fathers also report pretty highly likelihood of reporting excellent health and less likelihood of reporting any days that they felt sick. However, I find no evidence of effects on the extreme or chronic aspects of health, like hospitalization or daily prescription medication. And then if I move to 5 to 20 months after the birth period, mothers report excellent health and fewer number of hospitalizations still persist, but actually fathers actually show that unexpected increase in reporting any day sick suddenly around 5 to 20 month period. So I'm looking at the mechanism analysis by looking at three different channels. First one is I'm looking at the career pause. So as you can see from the figure on the left, this is the mothers. So basically mothers are less likely to report on incidents where they are not working or they are absent from work without pay, specifically due to childcare or childbirth, if they are having access to the paid family leave. So the light gray line is the period after the CAPFL, the solid line, the dark gray line is the before. So we can see that that kind of incidence is way lower. However, for the fathers, actually, they are slightly more likely to report that incidence around month 5 than month 6, specifically due to the fact that mothers have to return to work after month 4 or 5 after the leave ends, and that's when fathers are unexpectedly participating in childcare using all of the resources that they have. And that may have resulted in unexpected increase in the days of sick. And then the second mechanism that I was looking at is the leave usage. And as expected, mothers are less likely to quit their job. They are more likely to use paid and unpaid leave in both pre and post birth, so including pregnancy period and after birth, they are more likely to use the leave. However, fathers show actually overall reduction in all types of leave taking behavior during pre-birth, and no notable take-up of after childbirth. So this is consistent with the literature that shows that fathers are not the ones who are taking the leave, although they are eligible. It's exclusively mothers who are taking advantage of the leave. And then the third mechanism analysis shows a stark difference between mothers and fathers' labor force participation behavior around childbirth. So mothers who have access to the paid family leave, which is in the light gray line, are more likely to be working. However, who are not exposed to or have no access to the paid family leave are less likely to work and eventually exit from the labor force. However, fathers do not show any difference between before and after the policy. So because of all these three channels of mechanism, and then my finding on health suggests that policymakers should continue to view the paid leave as an opportunity to improve health outcomes for both parents. However, I find quite a nuanced effect on father's health, especially when the leave expires around month 4 and month 5. And then it's due to the temporary increase in father's unpaid work absence after the PFL ends. And then I suggest that the current form of PFL is quite limited. It's very short, 6 weeks, and then it's not 100% paid. So these factors should be accounted for when expecting these programs in the future, especially with a strong focus on equal utilization of both parents. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jiyoon. That was perfectly on time. Thank you very much. We have time for questions. Please raise your hand if you would like to ask one. So maybe I will start. It's very nice and positive, I guess, also from a policy perspective, to see that women are less likely to quit if they're on the program. Also because, I guess part of the reason is that they learn how to manage the duties and then can continue on their own, or maybe substitute with another child minder or whatever it is. So what are the broader implications of your work for the potential future expansion of childcare in the US?
Right. So considering that the US is not doing well in terms of providing mothers the environment that they need, especially after they give childbirth. So expanding these paid family leave and the mandating more federally across the states is considered to be positive in terms of their health, because parents' health are going to be translated to the infant's health and their development, and also their cognitive ability. So it has a large ripple effects to the society, and also it's going to lower the healthcare cost in the US, because if they're gonna visit hospital less and hospitalize less, and they use prescription drug less, and it also has some ripple effects on the healthcare industry in US as well.
Yes, very, very interesting. Thanks a lot. We have a question by Jeehoon. Please ask your question.
Yeah, so to me, it sounds like this program has a very big impact. So I just wonder whether you can talk a little bit more about the magnitude relative to, say, other previous studies findings.
Mm-hmm. So it's actually, I cannot compare apple to apple, but because the previous studies have used the mother's health about only during post-birth period.
Section, która nie była w conflict mode. I said, oh, it's really interesting, but why did you?
Yeah, so but I'm looking at the two different periods separately. So, but then the magnitudes are pretty comparable. I actually cite some of the existing papers that have found the health effects on mothers, and then the magnitudes as well as the labor force participation impact are pretty aligned. Although I just want to point out that I'm looking at different time periods.
We have time. We have more time for one or two more questions or comments. Well, on a personal note, I couldn't agree more with your policy implications, and good to see the findings, and that you're supporting some of these very important debates that have also implications for outside of the US. So with that being said, I would like to invite the next presenter to already upload the presentation. If you have any questions for Jiyoon, you can ask them now, or you can write in the chat. So we can transfer now. We can go into the next presentation by Joanna Lahey. So please, Joanna, take it away. I cannot hear. Is it possible that you're muted?
Sorry about that.
No
hi.
Hi.
This is joint work with Roberto Mosquera, and special thanks to the Sloan Foundation for funding. So the motivation for this paper is that the Hispanic population in the United States has been steadily growing over time. And in addition, the average age of Hispanics in the United States has also been steadily increasing over time. And people may be doing better or worse. For example, older Hispanics tend to have higher labor force participation, but on the other hand, they tend to have worse savings outcomes. So tracing employment patterns and discrimination by age is important. And this is especially interesting because there's a very large literature on health outcomes by Hispanic and age status, but there's not much work on employment. A second motivation for this study comes from audit studies where people will send out fake resumes to real employers and measure response rates back. And early audit studies find labor market discrimination against young Hispanic applicants, but these studies tend not to be very well designed. For example, in one of the early studies, they said that Hispanic applicants didn't have Hispanic enough accents, and so they were instructed to use fake accents. Better designed, newer audit studies do not find labor market discrimination against Hispanics, with a notable exception being Pager et al. In 2009. And that study is limited only to looking at Puerto Ricans in New York City, who may be a little bit different than Hispanics in the rest of the country. These audit studies tend to focus on a single age group, usually younger applicants. And an important thing to note is that when you're doing an audit study based on age, you have to have some sort of signal of age, usually an education date. And so we focus just on high school graduates, which is about half of the population of Hispanics and about half of the population of non-Hispanics in the United States. So this study is in 3 parts. First, we look at our survey data, the census, the ACS, by age and Hispanic status over time. For this, we limit to US born only high school graduates. Then we reanalyze 2 previous experiments that had been done for previous studies. One uses students and the other has HR manager samples. And we compared resume ratings for high school educated clerical applicants with Hispanic and non-Hispanic last names. And it's important to note that with this study, we only have non-Hispanic first names. There are no Hispanic first names. Then we have a new experiment where we use MTurk to have people rate resumes for high school educated clerical applicants. And here we have both Hispanic first and last names in combinations. And we also have the ability to look at the effects of different stereotypes about Hispanic workers. So I'm not showing any charts here. I'm just giving a summary. But in contrast to similar charts that compare Black and white people by age, we find no clear patterns by Hispanic status and age among the high school graduate population. Women have more similar patterns by Hispanic status and age than do men. And we can't really say anything about hiring discrimination with these data because it's just survey data. So that brings us to the first 2 lab in the field experiments. And so with these 2 previous experiments, we showed 40 randomized resumes for a clerical position in the first experiment to around 150 students, and in the second experiment to around 70 human resources managers. We asked them to rate resumes on a 1 to 7 Likert scale, where 7 is high. We tracked their eyes, so we know that they looked at the entire resume. We indicated age by high school graduation date. And just as a reminder, there are no Hispanic first names in these resumes, only Hispanic last names. And this took place in Texas. So this is not from this paper. This is from a previous paper that uses the same experiments. And here you see on the x-axis age of the applicant in the whose resume it was. And then the y-axis is what the resume was rated by the raters. And here you can see with the dashed blue line that there's kind of a very slight U shape for resumes with white names. And for resumes with Black names, at a young age, there's a very large difference. And that difference decreases as the smooth green line starts increasing. And then it drops down again at older ages. So this is in contrast for Black and white names. This is what it looks like if we do the exact same thing on the exact same study using Hispanic and non-Hispanic names. Essentially, it looks about the same. Here, we did the same thing, but we asked human resource managers, and you can see kind of the same non-pattern with maybe some differences at older ages. So bottom line for these first 2 experiments, students and human resources participants treat Hispanic and non-Hispanic resumes very similarly across ages 35 to 76. And this is in striking contrast to earlier results by Black and non-Black first names. Now, it might be that Hispanic last names just don't signal Hispanic in the same way that Hispanic first names do. And in addition, these 2 experiments were not set up to test stereotypes about Hispanics. So that leads us to the 3rd experiment. Here, we recruited participants in Amazon's MTurk. We had about 1,000 participants. We asked them to each rate about 30 resumes in a Qualtrics survey. And this experiment ran from kind of just before the pandemic to sort of during the pandemic a little bit. And participants did not know that they were part of an experiment until they completed the survey. So here again, we see no significant difference between Hispanics and non-Hispanic resumes. Hispanics experience here an increasing trend in ratings as they age, and there's a slight decrease in ratings for older non-Hispanics. We can also split this apart by the different kinds of Hispanic names. So Hispanic first and last name, people who have a Hispanic first name but a non-Hispanic last name, and people who have a non-Hispanic first name and a Hispanic last name. And we, again, find no significant difference. And particularly for the Hispanic first and last names, they look like they're right on top of each other. And that increasing trend seems to be driven by people with mixed signal first and last names. We then check on effects of various Hispanic stereotypes in two different ways. So first, we have two approaches to analyze the potential effect of Hispanic stereotypes. What we did was, after the first attention check, we brought back the resumes and we asked participants questions to assess the need for supervision and communication skills for each applicant. And so one stereotype is that Hispanics might need more supervision, and we don't find any difference between the ethnicities for this. A second potential stereotype is that Hispanics have poor communication skills, and again, we find no difference between the ethnicities here. Another way of testing stereotypes is to introduce counter stereotypes. So here we randomly changed resume characteristics. So for example, for this stereotype that Hispanics have more children and thus might require more time off work, we use volunteering at a PTA to signal having children, and we find no difference between the ethnicities and how that affects the hireability score. We do find evidence for the stereotype that Hispanics work in low-skilled jobs. So having previous experience in low-skilled jobs negatively affects Hispanics less than it affects non-Hispanics. It's worse for a non-Hispanic to have a low-skilled job. And having a high-quality previous experience gives Hispanics a premium in ratings compared to non-Hispanics. So the bottom line for this third experiment is that MTurk participants treat Hispanic and non-Hispanic resumes very similarly across the age range. And it isn't just that they're choosing things randomly. They actually do, in a survey that we give them, they do recognize what Hispanic names are versus non-Hispanic names. And they do rate better resumes more highly. It's not that they're just rating resumes randomly. We're actually quite good at predicting what resumes are going to, they're going to rate highly. We find no evidence for anti-Hispanic stereotypes about laziness, communication skills, or number of children. And we do find some evidence for the Hispanic stereotype that Hispanic workers are likely to work in low-skilled jobs. So the bottom line is that in national survey data and 3 experiments, these suggest that for high school graduates without college degrees, there's no discernible pattern to labor market outcome differences by Hispanic versus non-Hispanic status by cohort and age over time, or in a recent cross-section. And hypothetical Hispanic and non-Hispanic job applicants for a clerical position are treated similarly by age in 3 different experiments. And so this study kind of points out that minorities are not a monolith. Results for Black people may be very different than for Hispanic people, and we should not lump all minorities together in the same group. And as a caveat, this study was only looking at high school graduates. It may be that results are very different for people with less than a high school education or people with a college education or more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name when I was announcing your talk. Thank you very much for this timely and interesting presentation. If people have questions, they can raise their virtual hand. There's a Philippe appreciates your experiment. And I see Jeehoon has a question for you. Please go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. If I recall correctly, you say you also restrict the sample to US-born people, and my understanding is that there are a lot of like unauthorized, say, immigrants or like non-citizen Hispanic in the US. So I'm just curious whether those stereotypes or kind of discrimination is based on their legal status, like citizenship status, not their, say, racial or ethnicity.
Right. So there are many different situations for Hispanics in the United States. And one concern is that some Hispanic people are not citizens. The reason that we limited things the way that we limited them to is because these audit studies, when you're looking at age, they require a data of high school graduation. And there's a footnote in the paper that has the exact percentage, but most of the Hispanics in the United States that get that high school education are actually US citizens. So this was not, we can't really say anything about undocumented immigrants with this study.
Thank you. Philippe?
Hi, Joanna. I had a question. I thought you said that participants were not aware of participation in the experiment.
Right.
Could you explain that part to me?
Right. So we didn't go through MTurk research MTurk. We went through regular MTurk. And we didn't lie to them, but we kind of represented ourselves without explicitly lying, so that they thought that they were working for an actual firm doing actual resume evaluation for us. And then at the end, we told them, hey, you were in an experiment. If you don't want your data to be used, please let us know right now. You'll still get paid. Nobody said don't use it.
That's an interesting approach.
Yeah, there's lots of trade-offs because, you don't want to lie, but these audit studies do the same kind of thing. I think the concern in economics about not lying is that you don't want people to you don't want your subject pool to be polluted, and so in audit studies it's okay because they never know that they're being studied. In this case, we wanted to not tell them at the end, but our IRB would not let us do the study unless we post consented at the end. So this is the trade-off we had to make.
One final question from the audience. I'm just very quickly, why is it that it was you said that it was this having had a previous low-skilled job experience was actually negatively impacting the non-Hispanics, which I find interesting. Do you have an explanation for this?
Well, so this is a clerical position, and if you have taken a low skill job before, there's questions about why are you really qualified for a clerical position? And so these are things like waitressing or retail that aren't quite pink collar. I can't remember what collar it is when you're doing the service industry.
Yeah, I think it is pink collar. Yeah.
Yeah, but clerical work is a white collar position, and so they're already assuming that Hispanic people have had this kind of negative experience, bad experience, but they're not assuming that white people have.
I see. Well, thank you very much for this interesting presentation. We are at the last but not least presentation for the day. We have Stanislao Maldonado, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, please correct me. So please take it away, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I cannot see you. Can you tell me whether you can see my presentation?
We can see it, yes.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. It's very nice to have the chance of sharing my research with you guys, participants in this workshop. Let me start motivating the paper in the following way. We know I don't need to convince you that women empowerment is a critical component of economic development. Interestingly, though, we have very few interventions that address empowerment in a multidimensional way. What you see in the literature and policy interventions in general tend to focus only on few dimensions, like some of them just provide transfers and some training, so on and so forth. We don't have too many interventions out there that address empowerment in this multidimensional way, as was mentioning before. And when it comes to looking at the evidence, what we have in the literature in most of the cases is that even in the cases in which you have multidimensional interventions, in most of the cases, we have very limited evidence regarding all these dimensions that I was mentioning before. So then what we did in this paper is trying to understand how multifaceted interventions can break low empowerment equilibriums in the developing countries. In particular, we did this in Colombia. We studied this flagship women empowerment program that was implemented by the government of Atlantic. The program was targeting women older than 18 years old with a business. And what is interesting about this program is that addresses different dimensions of empowerment. They provide training on soft skills and women's rights and self-esteem in phase 1 of the intervention. Then they have vocational training in which they provide a lot of emphasis in terms of technical skills. Then in the third phase of this intervention, they provide some mentoring. And at the end of the program, they provide seed capital. So in that way, this program addresses several important dimensions that has been emphasized by the literature. So in terms of the research design, we were facing a very interesting challenge at the beginning of, the government approached us and they were interested in evaluating this program that was considered successful by many people in the country. However, there were several interesting things to address in this context. We didn't have information. The program was implemented like 4 to 5 years before we started to work on this. So we didn't have pre-treatment data. We only have some basic information about the participants of the program. So what we did was we secured access to about 2 million records coming from census in 2011, 1 year before the intervention. And we used that information to create a sampling frame using matching. So we use matching as a pre-processing tool in the sense that was discussed by Ho and other authors. And using matching, we were able to identify people that were similar in 2011 to those who were participating in the program in 2012 and 2013. So for each participant of the program, we were able to identify 3 individuals with the same set of pre-treatment characteristics. Based on that information, we were we hired a survey firm that collected a sample out of this sampling frame. We had about 18,000 records, 1,800 records. And with that information, we used genetic matching to estimate causal effects using the Abadi and Evans nearest neighbor estimator. And because we know that matching, the main identification assumption behind matching is selection on observables, then we use a sensitivity analysis developed by Rosenbaum to evaluate how sensitive our results are from violations of the CIA assumption. So in this sense, we use matching in 2 steps as a way to construct a sampling frame. And then once we collected the sample, the final sample for the intervention, we use matching again as a way to estimate causal effects. So for that reason, we use, or we call this strategy a double matching. So just very briefly, I can show you that this is the sampling frame. So we have like 20,000 observations. I mean, I don't have the time to go into the details, but in general, you will see in this table that there is balance in terms of pretreatment characteristics in a large set of dimensions, and that balance is preserved in the final sample. Okay, using that strategy, we find a lot of interesting things. So I'm just gonna mention the general findings that we have, and then at the end, I'm gonna perhaps discuss some other relevant ones in detail. But the basic idea is that we were able to find very important effects in economic dimensions. There is a 31% increase in monthly incomes, 26% reduction in multidimensional poverty, a 50% increase in the likelihood of being employed. We didn't find any evidence regarding household assets, and most of the effects seem to be happening in the labor market. So we have large effects on labor supply and related indicators. And we also have important increases in savings. So the story is different when it comes to political and social empowerment indicators. We don't find any evidence of changes in terms of changes in decision-making power at the household level. We do find important effects in terms of political participation and social capital. Interestingly, though, we also find that there is an increase in the likelihood of experiencing intra-household violence, a 15% increase. We don't find any evidence in terms of time use, attitudes towards women's rights, and reproductive and sexual rights. So in terms of the economic effects, we find that, for instance, in the case of monthly income, the effect is about $45 US. The mean is about $150, which represents an increase of 30%. We also have a reduction, as I was mentioning before, in terms of the multidimensional poverty variable that I was mentioning before, and there are no effects in terms of health coverage or pension coverage, maybe because in the case of Colombia, there is a universal access to health coverage, for instance. We don't find any evidence on assets. And regarding intra-household violence, we use a least randomization experiment. And in the case of these experiments, we are basically we are interested in this interaction. As you can see, there is an increase of close to 20% in the possibility of facing household violence. Okay, I was mentioning before as well that we use this sensitivity analysis, and in general, what we found is that you need to have large deviations in terms of the CIA assumption in order the results to disappear. For instance, in the case of monthly income, you will need to have deviations about the 50% in terms of selection here to have the results to change qualitatively the results. Okay, so just to summarize, what we have here is what I evaluate is the long-term impacts of this multifaceted policy intervention in Colombia. We find important effects on economic dimensions, mixed effects in the case of political and social empowerment. Sadly, we also find an increase in intra-household violence, and we don't have effects on other dimensions that are considered relevant. The interesting thing we believe in the case of this paper is the use, this novel use of matching as a way to not only in terms of identifying the causal effect, but also in the design part in terms of collecting data. And one final lesson is that we need to focus, or we need to pay attention to all the multidimensional nature of empowerment, because we can see positive effects, but also in other dimensions, a different story if we are not able to address or to study empowerment, taking into account this multidimensional nature. I'm gonna finish there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. If you have a question, please raise your virtual hand in the audience. If not, may I ask a question related? So all the economic outcomes improve, including their savings, but the violence increases. I think 19% was what you showed. Can you? Yeah. So what is driving the violence? Is it jealousy on part of the partners, or what is driving this?
Yes, as part of the evaluation, there was a qualitative dimension in which, you know, they have some interviews with the former participants. And one study that we found in that case is that there was a back reaction of the couples. And as a consequence, we even found that some people just split, you know, some couples just split as a consequence of the intervention, because they didn't want to be in a you know, in an environment like this anymore.
Yeah. One question from Jeehoon, please.
Yeah, so it sounds like this program is designed to help people to business. And I think you talked about this employment outcome, but I wonder whether there's other outcomes you look at regarding, say, their business performance.
Yes, that's right. They were focusing the intervention on women with businesses. Interestingly, though, we found that most of the relevant effects are in the labor market outcomes, which is something that is not new. There are also previous evaluations that also have found that even for the case of entrepreneurship programs, the labor market effects are important. So part of the interpretation here is related with the program's implementation. The program was interested in fostering associations with between the participants, but based on the qualitative evaluation, most of these partnerships didn't work because they were not assigned to people with the same business idea, or there were problems in terms of using the capital seed that was provided to them and stuff like that. So that's the interpretation that we have regarding why this component of entrepreneurship didn't work, and mostly because they were not able to have these associations working in the way that they were expecting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the nice presentation to all of our presenters, and for the nice questions and engagement with the audience. This is just a small sample of the excellent work that we publish in the journal. And from my viewpoint, this was a very nice and successful session. And yeah, please stick around. There's another day with more presentations, and that's it. Take care, everyone, and thanks for attending.
Yeah, thank you very much also from my side as the editor-in-chief. A wonderful set of presentations and papers. Please notice that we will have a video out very soon. When it's online on the GLO website, please try to advertise for this in your networks, so that people who missed this afternoon, at least from European period of time, can follow up what has gone on. And yes, looking forward to see you at other times at other places, maybe tomorrow, and also perhaps in the social media while interacting on these issues. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.